What is EQ? Well, EQ is short for equalisation. And in sound we use EQ or equalisation for the 3 C's, which are correction, creativity and control. Let me explain. In audio terms, EQ relates to the frequency spectrum, that is, the range of frequencies that we can hear and that devices such as microphones and speakers can respond to. It's generally agreed that the range of human hearing is from 20 Hz, 20 vibrations per second, all the way up to 20,000 Hz or 20 kilohertz. And there are many factors that will affect your hearing's range throughout, such as age, gender and health, so the 20 to 20,000 range certainly doesn't apply to everyone. In terms of music, this audible frequency spectrum is about 10 octaves. In relation to the ranges of instruments, the piano is a little over 7 in this range here, while the bass guitar covers this range here. The piccolo, probably the highest instrument, covers this range here. So how do notes relate to frequency? Well, here's the note A, and this note vibrates at around 440 times per second, so its frequency is 440 Hz. This is the A above middle C on a keyboard or the open A string on a violin. The note an octave above this is 880 Hz, twice 440, and the note an octave above that is 1760 Hz, and so on. The octave below 440 is 220 Hz, and the octave below that is 110 Hz, and so on and so on. We have to go down and double to go up. For what it's worth, and I think it's quite important, the bottom string on a 4-string bass guitar here is just over 41 Hz. Pretty low, but we can hear more than a full octave below that. If we think of the signal from an instrument as a flat line of frequency, then EQ allows us to define a curve or curves of frequencies that we can turn up or down while leaving other frequencies unaffected, like here and this range here. This lets us shape the frequency content of the signal, which can be very useful. So why do we want to do this? Well, let's remove the keyboard but keep the idea of frequency going from left to right and gain or level going up and down, so we can represent the frequency range of an instrument or device on a graph like this. Now, let's say the output of a microphone, for example, has frequencies where it's under-sensitive and others where it's oversensitive. We can use EQ to turn down the oversensitive frequencies and turn up the undersensitive ones, making its response more equal, like this gold line here, hence the term equalisation. So how does an EQ circuit work? First, we have to divide the entire frequency spectrum into a series of more manageable ranges. So we have low frequencies, or LF down here, then the mid-frequencies here, which we then subdivide into low mid-frequencies, or LMF, and high mid-frequencies, or HMF, and then finally the high frequencies up here. The low and high frequencies in an EQ circuit are usually handled by a shelving filter. This is an EQ that turns up or down all the frequencies above or below a predetermined frequency, known as the corner frequency. All EQs have a gain control, and the gain control usually works from the centre or 12 o'clock position. Turning it anti-clockwise reduces the level of the filter, and turning it clockwise increases the level of the filter. For the mid-frequencies we need a bit more control, so while we still have a gain, EQ for mid-ranges will usually include 2 more parameters. Firstly, the frequency or sweep control lets us change the frequencies that will be adjusted. More accurately, it lets you select the centre frequency of the bell-shaped curve of the filter. It's sometimes called the sweep as it can be moved left or right across the frequency ranges like this. The last control is called the Q control, or the bandwidth control, which is perhaps a little bit more descriptive of what it does. This changes the overall width of the filter. Q, by the way, stands for quality factor. A narrow bandwidth that affects a few frequencies is called high Q, like this, and a wide filter that affects a lot of frequencies is called, perhaps unsurprisingly, low Q. And in the middle, here, we have a mid Q, or mid quality. Has an associated number 2. For most EQs in DAWs, the highest number is 10 and the lowest 0.1, but anything below about 2 can be considered low Q and therefore wide, and anything above the number 2 is high and therefore narrow. These circuits are called parametric EQs, and we'll also have a parametric EQ, very similar on the high-mid frequencies. Note that the frequency ranges is different though on the sweep control. Let's have a look at a couple of examples to see how the EQ circuit works. First we'll go creative. Listen to the sound of this vocal. I'm going to try and make it sound as though it's coming through a telephone. This means removing the low frequencies, like this. A telephone speaker can't reproduce those. so we filter them out, nor can it do the high frequencies, so we'll take out those. So the vocal starts to sound thin with no low frequency or LF and dull with no high. Another thing a telephone speaker does is emphasise mid-range frequencies. So I'll take this filter and start to turn those frequencies up, quite harsh. I'll use the Q control to make it filter a bit narrower. Listen to the quality of the voice now. So we've used EQ to emulate the sound of the phone speaker. We're just using bypass to turn it off and on so we can contrast the two. Another useful technique we can apply, which explains how EQ works, uses low pass filters, where all the high frequencies are cut, and high pass filters where all the low frequencies are cut. Here you can hear the music in full bandwidth, nothing's been taken out. Now using a low pass filter, we can filter out the high and mid frequencies. Using EQ like this makes the music sound as though it's coming from a party next door. Let's see what happens if we go the other way. This time using a high pass filter, we filter out all the low and mid frequencies. And all we're left with the very high, so the music sounds as though it's coming from the headphones of someone sitting next to us on the train. Very annoying. EQ's used an awful lot for production, both music and for Foley, in exactly the ways I've just shown you, but we can also use it for corrective purposes on a problem signal. Here's a snare drum that's got a very annoying ring. Any ring must have a frequency, so we'll hunt for the frequency. Contrary to what you might think, we're going to turn up the gain and move the frequency around until the ring is really noticeable. Once we've found that point, and here it's about 980 to 1000 Hz, we turn the gain down, like this. Now listen to the snare. We can use the EQ bypass switch to turn it on and off and hear the difference. That's the EQ on, EQ off. Quite the difference. Well, that's creativity and correction covered, but what about control? If we have a live sound system, the system is set up in a room which may emphasise certain frequencies due to its dimensions and surfaces. This can cause imbalance in the sound system, and it results, unfortunately, in acoustic feedback, that annoying ring you can get at concerts and gigs. It's impossible and impractical to physically change the space the sound system is set up in, so what we can do is find out where the problem frequency is and use EQ, in this case a graphic EQ, to reduce the sensitivity of the system to those frequencies, making the possibility of acoustic feedback less likely. A graphic EQ is simply a set of narrow bandwidth EQ filters, with each that have a set center frequency. The slider is a gain control that, like the rotor control, works from a center position. Pushing it up increases the designated frequency range and down reduces the designated frequency range. The graphic EQ is positioned between the output of the mixer and the input to our powered speakers, a little bit like this. We could of course use an insert point as well. If we turn the system up until it begins to ring a little, then we can listen to the frequencies that are causing the problems. If you know your frequency range, you can make a guess at the frequency of the feedback. In the case of this one, it's about a kilohertz. Or you could use an app to find the frequency. And then what we do is reduce that frequency range, or the closest to it, on the graphic, and reduce the sensitivity of the system to that frequency. Easy when you know how. Here's some additional reading. Thoroughly recommend the Vivian Capel book on how to avoid acoustic feedback.